Okay, everyone, let's get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Pierce, and I'm the director of the Transnational Literature Series at Brookline Booksmith, just outside of Boston, Massachusetts, and your host for today's conversation. The Transnational Series focuses on stories of migration, the intersection of politics and literature, and works in translation. I just want to offer a quick Zoom webinar tutorial. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a few icons. One of those is a Q&A icon where you can enter in your questions at any time during the conversation. Another button will get you to the chat window. That space is there for you all. Please feel free to chat during the event. I will be in the chat as well, dropping in useful information, including links to books by our authors. We do make every effort to keep these events free to attend in the hopes that you'll purchase the featured books from us. So thank you in advance for taking a look and supporting independent bookstores. And finally, you can see us, but we can't see you, so relax and please enjoy the conversation. Today I have the very, very great honor of introducing Ariana Harwicz, Annie McDermott, and Maryse Meijer, here to discuss and celebrate the release of Tender, the final book in the Involuntary Trilogy. Ariana Harwicz is one of the most radical figures in contemporary literature. Compared to Virginia Woolf and Sylvia Plath, her prose is characterized by its violence, eroticism, irony, and direct criticism of the cliches surrounding the notions of the family and conventional relationships. Born in Buenos Aires, Ariana studied screenwriting and drama in Argentina and earned a first degree in performing arts from the University of Paris, as well as a master's degree in comparative literature from the Sorbonne. She has taught screenwriting and written 2 plays which have been staged in Buenos Aires. She directed the documentary El Dia del Ceviche, which has been shown at festivals in Argentina, Brazil, Cuba, and Venezuela. Her first novel, Die My Love, received rave reviews and many accolades and has been adapted for the stage. Annie McDermott is a literary translator working from Spanish and Portuguese into English. Her translations include Feeble-Minded and Tender by Harwicz, which were co-translations with Carolina Orloff, Brickmakers and Dead Girls by Selva Almada, and the luminous novel And Empty Words by Mario Levrero. Her work has been shortlisted for the Premio Valle Inclán and the TA First Translation Prize. And today's moderator, Maryse Meijer, is the author of The Seventh Mansion, Rag, Heartbreaker, and Northwood. She lives in Chicago. And last but certainly not least, thank you to Mariana Casale, who will be interpreting today's event for us. I'm so thrilled to have them here together in conversation. And now, Ariana, Annie, and Maryse.
Thank you so much, Pierce. And thank you for everyone who's here tuning in from all over the world. It's wonderful to see everyone's names pop up. Before we start, I just wanted to say what a personal honor it is for me to be talking about Ariana's work today, and Annie's as well. These books, these 3 amazing, amazing books are some of my favorite, not just from recent years, but of all time, honestly. I think Feeble-Minded is one of my top 5 favorite books in the world that I've ever read. So it's a dream come true for me to be here to talk about them. It would be impossible to do justice to the complexity of these books and their brilliance, but hopefully we'll give you a little bit of taste tonight. If you haven't read the books, we will be talking in detail about the writing, which is so important. We won't be giving away any spoilers. The books don't hinge on plot, so don't worry about that. But I would like to dig into what makes these books so special linguistically and thematically. I'm sorry, I don't know when to pause for Mariana to translate for me. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Ariana can understand so far.
Okay, thank you. So first, Ariana, I wanted to talk about the meaning of the name, the Involuntary Trilogy. We are talking specifically about Tender today and celebrating the release of the final book in the series, but I think about them as all one novel. Maybe you can read any one of them at any time, but they are connected by theme, by atmosphere, by so many things, but they also change in really interesting ways throughout the trilogy. So this word involuntary, if you can talk a little bit about the origins of the trilogy and the meaning behind that particular label.
Bueno, hola a todos, hola, gracias. Quiero decir que no hablo inglés por culpa de mis padres que eran de izquierda anti-imperialistas, ¿no?
Hello, everyone. I just want to say that I don't speak English, and that's down to my parents who were left-wing and anti-imperialists, so they didn't teach me.
Comunistas, comunistas. Bueno, entonces quiero decir que, digamos que mi encuentro con la escritura nace del encuentro con la música. Yo estaba viviendo en el campo en Francia, en la Francia profunda, no había escrito nada, y un día en una casa al borde del río descubrí a Glenn Gould, ¿no? Y ese encuentro con Glenn Gould me llevó a la escritura. Entonces creo que mi primer encuentro con la escritura ya es un encuentro de traducción.
So my first encounter with writing is an encounter with music. And when I was living in the deepest rural France, by the side of a river, I came into contact with Glenn Gould, and that was a deep encounter with music that then translated into literature. So it's fair to say that it's strictly connected, or closely connected with translation, with the act of translation in itself.
Bien, para contestar tu pregunta sobre la falsa trilogía, o sobre una especie de tríptico extraño, que ahora van a salir las tres juntas en anagrama, yo lo viví como tres partituras musicales, ya hablaremos con Annie de la música. Cuando empecé a componer una, Die My Love, la música de Die My Love me llevó a la música de Feeble Minded, que me llevó a la música de Tender. Yo lo veo como un tríptico musical.
So I see this work as a musical triptych. So it's three pieces of music. So the first piece of music that was Die My Love, went naturally into Feeble Minded, and that took me naturally into Tender, forming a musical triptych.
Es más un concepto musical que temático, ¿no? Y cuando esa musicalidad se rompió, Degenerado, que es otra novela, ya dejó de formar parte de esa familia, ¿no?
So it's more a musical concept. Therefore, when that musicality broke down with Degenerado, Degenerate, that then became a completely separate work.
And Degenerate, just for the English speakers, is the Feeble-Minded, is the second book, yes? No.
No, Degenerate is a separate one. Therefore, when that musicality of the trilogy was broken, that's when Ariana found that Degenerate became something separate, something distinct.
Con Degenerado tenemos un problema de censura, pero ya aparecerá en inglés.
There's a problem of censorship with Degenerate, but it will come out in English eventually.
Oh, good. I can't wait. With Charco or no? We don't know yet. Hopefully, Carolina, please. So it's so interesting that you talk about the musicality. For any of us who have read Ariana's work, that is the most distinct aspect of the translations, is that they make sense first on the level of sound, and then through that you get meaning. But the books are so complex in the way that they're constructed, down to a sentence level, where often you have to get to the end of a sentence to understand what the sentence is about. Then in chunks of text, in the paragraphs or the books that don't have paragraphs, you have to get to the end of a long section, sometimes to understand a moment pages before. And then the books as a whole do the same thing. You finish a book. I read Tender twice in a row, finished it, started it again. Only when I had the end did I understand things that were buried in the beginning, or not buried, I mean, they're right there. And then the trilogy does the same. So there's all of these echoes and fragments that sort of build an intensity on an emotional level first before an intellectual level. That makes sense.
¿Puedo decir algo sobre eso?
Can I say something about that? Yes, go ahead.
Yes, please. No, quiero decir que que cuando una forma artística está perturbada, puede ser un cuadro, ¿no? Puede ser una sinfonía de Mahler. En este caso, modestamente, hablamos del tríptico Tender, Feeble-Minded y Die My Love. Cuando una forma está perturbada, que creo que es a lo que te referías, que no lo sabemos inmediatamente y hay que componer los fragmentos, eso tiene que ver con que está ya perturbada la gramática, ¿no?
So when an artistic form is disturbed, so it could be anything, it could be this trilogy or it could be a symphony by Mahler, when the work of art is disturbed, it's because its grammar is disturbed, and that's why you have to collect the fragments to make sense of it.
Creo que te referías a eso, a tu lectura, ¿no, Maryse? No es que la historia está alterada porque hay una alteración de la dramaturgia, de las acciones, sino que ya la lengua misma está perturbada.
So it's language that's disturbed, that it's perturbed or broken. So it's language itself rather than the novels that's broken.
Yeah.
Y muchas veces cuando escribo, yo tampoco sé lo que va a pasar después. Por eso cuando quizás mi agente literario, al que amo, o un editor me pide, dame un adelanto de la novela, de lo que va a pasar en los primeros 10 capítulos, para mí, en mi forma de escribir, es imposible, porque yo misma no sé qué va a pasar.
I myself don't know what's going to happen next, so it's very difficult when I'm asked for an advance. My literary agent, for example, whom I love, asks me, can you give us an advance, tell us what's going to happen? I don't know. I struggle with that because I myself don't know what's going to happen next.
It's the same for me as a writer. I never know, and that's part of the fun. But it's the language that is the engine, is the fever, as you said in other interviews that I've read, and it infects the reader as well in this really incredible, deeply disturbing and beautiful way.
Sí, porque quizás una palabra, ya nos contará Annie o Carolina, ¿no? Cómo hacen con la traducción. Una palabra aparece, yo no la esperaba esa palabra, aparece la palabra arcada o foie gras, aparece una palabra que tiene una violencia inusitada y esa violencia me lleva a un acto criminal en la novela, pero es esa palabra la responsable y yo no sabía que iba a aparecer.
So it might be that a word turns up that has an unexpected violence to it, and it produces an effect that I had no idea was going to happen. So I'm taken away by the violence of the word itself to know what's going to be written next.
Pero la responsable del crimen, por ejemplo, en Feeble-Minded, es esa palabra, ¿se entiende? Esa palabra...
So it's the word itself that's responsible or that perpetrates the crime in Feeble-Minded, for example.
O en Tender, ¿no? Hay crímenes bastantes, ¿no? 2 de las 3 novelas tienen crímenes, ¿no?
So 2 of the 3 novels have crimes in them, and so that's the case with 2 of them.
They all have many crimes, I would say. Well, this leads me to asking Annie about your involvement with the last 2 novels of the trilogy, with Tender in particular, but what this process was like for you and Carolina in trying to translate the sound, which of course, once you take it from its original language, becomes an impossible task almost, of course, to do, what I would imagine a sort of terrifying responsibility. But can you tell us about what challenges you faced with these books, with Ariana's work in particular, compared to your other projects, and with Tender in specific?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's definitely a really particular challenge translating Ariana, and a particular kind of thrill as well, because you have so much freedom in a way, because you have to, in the same way as Ariana, she's just been talking about how sort of what she does is disturb the language, is kind of twist language into strange new shapes that it's never really been in before. You have to do that as the translator, and I think it helps having done both as co-translations. I think if there are 2 of you, you can sort of encourage each other to be a bit bolder. You can take more risks because there's somebody else there saying, yeah, no, I think we do need to go that far, or we do need to be brave in that way or use that word or depart more from the original. And I think also it helps when there's two of you finding out all of the never finding out all of the secrets of the text, especially with these texts, but two of you see, like, comparing notes on what you find in the text, and so you get this kind of extra kaleidoscopic reading. And so one of you will, because each line can mean so many different things and can have so many different kind of weights and so many different sort of connotations, one of you will read it and then suggest this translation, and then the other one will say, oh, but that doesn't seem to be anything about death or sex, and you're like, oh yeah, no, there is loads of death and sex in it as well, and so you go back and then the other person tries and you're like, no, but that's nothing about like the natural, I don't know, like you have to, like, there are so many layers that I think having two of you pushes you to try and include much more in it, which definitely helps the translation, I think, and makes it a lot more fun. Like, it's a lot of fun translating Ariana. You have a lot of freedom, and she really gives you a lot of freedom as well. Like, she's got, in a few events that I've done with Ariana, she has said, I'm an atheist, but I believe in the translator. And it's nice feeling like your writer believes in you.
Sí, yo soy atea, pero creo en las traductoras, ¿no?
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Exactly.
I am an atheist, but I believe in translators. Yeah.
Love that. That's beautiful. Annie, do you have an example of a, and if you don't, that's fine on the spot, but an example of a sentence or a word or some piece of the text that was difficult for you to find the meaning of, or any part of, do you have any example of a moment where you really thought this encapsulates the experience of trying to translate Ariana's work?
Gosh, let me think. I mean, I think one bit, I was reading through it earlier today and I was struck, I remembered a particular line which was just very difficult and encapsulates kind of the sound and the rhythm that are such important parts of translating Ariana, and also a little bit the way Carolina and I were working together. I think at one point we were joking and I was saying that I felt a bit like Carolina was kind of the voice of my conscience, like saying, no, this line just, it's not quite right, it's not strong enough, it's not powerful enough, was always what she said as we were getting closer to the final draft. And she'd always be like, no, it's not quite powerful enough. And this was a line which so many times she'd say, no, it's not quite powerful enough. And eventually I was like, how about now? I should say, okay, maybe now. And it's where the mother is following the son around the house and he's boiling some pasta in the kitchen. And then the final line of the paragraph just took a while to get the rhythm right. And it is, and with my son's back still turned in the steam from the stove, I can suddenly see myself dying. And that took a long time to get it so strong at the end, but in the end it did come off.
I love that Carolina's word was a strength, and you feel that so much with these books in the English, is that the language is just so incredibly intelligent and powerful, and it feels really organic to, like, you can't separate the characters, the narrator, the plot from the language. It's seamless and really incredible. We're going to hear a little bit from both of you so we can listen to the English and the Spanish together. I just wanted to mention that I had watched an interview maybe a couple years ago with Ariana and Carolina, where they were saying that Ariana was asking to have Carolina read the translation to her in English, just so she could judge it based on the sound, not necessarily understanding every single word. Ariana's English is much better than she lets on. So I'm sure she understands quite a lot. But just, I love that idea of sitting down and just listening and saying, does it strike my ear in the right way? Does it have the right musical quality? So I wanted to keep that in mind as we listen to both readings of the first page of Tinder.
Para mí fue muy importante conocer a Carolina, porque Carolina es argentina, es también inmigrante, extranjera, exiliada, y entonces tiene una relación sentimental con el español porteño parecida a la mía. Entonces hay una emoción que es imposible que la viva alguien que no es argentino, y ahí hubo un encuentro, ¿no? Y eso posibilitó Die My Love, ¿no?
It was very important for me to meet Carolina because she was also an Argentine emigre, an exile, someone who could feel the same level of emotion and intensity about the text, and that's where we started collaborating with Die My Love.
Igual está Sarah Moses también, ¿no? No, lo que quería decir era que quizás para mí llegué a la conclusión luego de 10 años, Die My Love cumple 10 años de que la escribí, y llegué a la conclusión de que para mí escribir es vivir algo trascendente y encontrar la forma para revelar esa trascendencia, ¿no?
So after 10 years, and Die My Love is 10 years old, writing is about finding transcendence and finding a way of revealing or manifesting that transcendence.
Pero encontrar la forma, que es la misión, la causa de cualquier artista, encontrar la forma, también esa forma la tiene que encontrar la traductora, entonces estamos en pie de igualdad, ¿no? La traductora también tiene que hacer un esfuerzo por encontrar qué forma le va a dar a Tender, ¿no?
So it's very much about finding the form, the shape, the way to manifest that transcendence, and it's the same for the writer, and it's the same for the translator, so it's the same kind of task, all about form and shape, a way to convey that.
¿Y quería que lea un fragmento o me equivoqué?
Sí.
Ok.
So we'll do a
Now?
reading now.
Now, yes, please.
Como en la iglesia, en la sinagoga, sacar los libros santos, ¿no?
So it's the same as in the synagogue, taking the holy books out. So, sí, así que ahora te toca a vos.
Sí, porque hoy hablamos con Annie de la regularidad en precoz, ¿no, Annie?
Today we talked about regularity in Tender.
Me despierto con la boca abierta como el pato cuando le sacan el hígado para el foie gras. Mi cuerpo está acá, mi cabeza más allá. Afuera una cosa golpea como una arcada. Todavía de noche, 2 pájaros se elevan violentos de mi árbol y al estrellarse se matan entre sí. Miro si me escribió. Había dormido con el ojo abierto y espiaba cada tanto. El fuego tira, metí 2 maderas húmedas y ahuecadas y me quedé con la cabeza adentro hasta que prendió. La sala se llenó de humareda, las fotografías de papá y mamá sobre el fogón. Soñé o sueño con flores de lupino, las flores salen de diferentes espigas blancas, lilas, rosas, y después empiezan a aparecer vainas y semillas. Me desperté. Pasos en la escalerita, 4 patas se tiran en caída libre hasta mis piernas. Me quedo frente a la ventana tapiada y me duermo con la mano abierta sobre el gato. El hijo baja rodando los escalones. Tiene sangre en las rodillas y me llama, mamá, mamá. Estoy despierta en la mecedora a 2 pasos de la escalera, pero con los ojos cerrados, el fuego ya no existe.
Beautiful.
Shall I read the English right after? Yeah, why not? I wake up gaping like a force-fed duck when they strip its liver out to make foie gras. My body is here, my mind over there, and outside something thuds like a dry heave. It's dark still and 2 birds flap violently out of my tree, collide in midair and fall dead. I look to see if he's written. One eye open all night long, checking in my sleep. The fire pulls. I threw on a couple of damp, hollow logs and stuck my head half up the chimney till they caught. The room filled with smoke. Mum and Dad's photo on the hearth. I'm dreaming of lupins, stems of flowers blooming white, pink and lilac, then the blood pods and seeds begin to form. I woke up. A sound on the stairs. 4 legs in freefall land in my lap. I sit and doze, facing the boarded up window with my hand laid over the cat. The child comes tumbling down the stairs, bloody-kneed, calling for me. Mum, Mum. I'm awake in the rocking chair right by the banister, but I keep my eyes tight shut. The fire no longer there.
It's so interesting to hear it in a non-American accent, even the English. So to think of like how there's still a translation for us, for English-speaking people, that there's still these little differences that change the way that the text feels. One moment when I was listening to Ariana that was so striking was the listing of the flowers. If you listen to that part, maybe I could have you both read that again so people can tune into just that little bit about how they have the rhythm is the same. Very beautiful in both languages.
Creo que era Thomas Berger, creo, que decía, pero tantos otros, que traducir es no estar en ningún lado, ¿no? Y realmente creo que escuchándola en inglés hay algo de no estar en ningún lado, ni en inglés ni en español, hay un sonido otro que se arma en la traducción.
I think it was Thomas Berger who said, and so many others, that translating is about not being anywhere. And when I hear it read in English, that's what I feel, that sense of not being anywhere.
Is it I almost said scary, maybe that's not the right word, but to give up the book to someone else to be translated, is there a fear that the book that people are reading in the translation is not the same book that you wrote? Or, I mean, you said before you believe in the translator, which I love and is great. But do you have that sense that the reader ends up in a place that's nowhere, if that makes sense? Like we're not at the site, of Ariana's book precisely in the Spanish, but we're somewhere else where we have Annie and Carolina's being kind of invested in the text.
Ariana te pregunta si te da un poco de miedito cuando entregas un libro para la traducción, de que la gente se sienta también que no está en ningún lado y que está conviviendo con las voces, con tu voz, con la de Annie, con la de Caro.
Bueno, a mí entregar un libro a la traducción me da más miedo que la maternidad y el divorcio. Con eso te digo todo.
Handing a book over for translation makes me more afraid than motherhood and divorce together. So that's just for you to have a sense of how I feel.
Para que tengas una idea, mis libros están traducidos a 18 idiomas, lo digo un poco con fetichismo porque se nota mi pasión por la traducción, he escrito un libro sobre eso, y entregar un libro a la traducción es entregar un libro al riesgo absoluto, ¿no? Porque además la traductora es dueña de la puntuación.
So handing a book over for translation is handing it over to total risk, because also the translator owns the punctuation. And I also wrote a book about translations.
Porque lo que le decía a Annie, Annie encontró, y Carolina por supuesto, que había una regularidad, una monotonía tonal, no soy música, ¿no? Pero entender que había que respetar, pero si Annie y Carolina hubieran escuchado otro soundtrack, otra música, quizás barroca o otra pista sonora, yo no hubiera podido hacer nada, y ellas son dueñas de la puntuación, y la puntuación es todo el libro, ¿no?
So in Tender, there's a tonal regularity and monotony that needed to be captured. And so if Annie and Carolina had listened to other music, they might not have been able to convey that monotonous, atonal rhythm of the novel.
We were talking, Ariana and I were talking about this earlier today, and it was really interesting to me because Ariana was saying just then that if we'd found a different kind of rhythm or music in the novel, that's how it would have had to be. But I think it felt we almost tried to do that and couldn't. The monotony kind of just didn't let us not include it. Like, it sort of bothered me for quite a long time that the first two sentences of the book seemed to have so much the same rhythm. It seemed almost like, I'll read them, and like, I wake up gaping like a force-fed duck when they strip its liver out to make foie gras. my body is here, my mind over there, and outside something thuds like a dry heave. Like normally you'd feel like that's too much the same rhythm, but it was the only, we sort of tried not having that and then realized, no, that's what's there in the original. There's no real escape from it. You do have to have that. But it was something that I sort of fought for a while as the translator, because I thought, no, this can't be how it should be. But you realize the further sort of into the book you get that that's exactly how it has to be, and there's a reason for that.
Y Tender es la más terrorista, o sea, son tres hermanas, ¿no? Si se quiere, en la fantasía, son tres hermanas, o sea, son tres mujeres, Feeble-Minded, Die My Love y Tender, anárquicas o antisociales, pero Tender realmente es terrorista, ¿no? Para mí es la más descarriada, ¿no?
So Tender, if we think of the novels as three sisters, Tender is the terrorist, is the one that's gone off the rails the most out of the three sisters.
No hay capítulos. En Die My Love hay separación de capítulos. En Feeble-Minded hay una pequeña atisbo de separación, un espacio. Pero Tender se entrega a la forma completa, es casi un poema lúgubre largo, ¿no?
So Tender is almost a continuous poem when there are no breaks. In Die My Love, there are sections. In Feeble-Minded, there's a glimpse of separation in sections, but then in Tender offers itself up to pure form. So it might be a continuous poem in that sense.
Sí, y lo que quería decir es que hay una anécdota de Miles Davis con Bill Evans, que decían que cuando se enamoraron artísticamente es porque Miles Davis decía que los dos escuchaban la música con el mismo oído. Y esa es mi utopía con la traducción, ¿no? Si por momentos el autor y el traductor pueden escuchar la música con el mismo oído, ¿no?
So there's an anecdote of Mike Davis and Bill Evans, who used to say that they listen to music with the same ear. So my utopian fantasy about translation is that if we just listen to the music with the same ear, the same way.
It's fascinating that you described the Tender as the terrorist sister that is the most violent, which is saying a lot because the bar that's set by the first two books is pretty high in terms of the reader, feeling almost overwhelmed by the narrator's degree of sort of fury-induced psychosis. But it's true that Tender in its style is the most relentless, and it sort of maps perfectly on that first line that I wake up gaping like a force-fed duck, and there's this theme throughout of the ducks being used for foie gras, and that's exactly the experience as the reader, is that you're being force-fed this constant, relentless stream of consciousness, intensity of the language, which is rich, just like pate is like it's uncomfortable, it's unpleasant. But it produces something, that is so sublime that it's like worth the violence of the experience of reading the text, and being in that world.
Sí, no sé si quieres que te hable un poco del lenguaje y después pasamos a cómo se crea el lenguaje en la traducción, pero es difícil. Lo que quería decir es que hay autores que escriben, me parece a mí, para la traducción, es decir, que se entregan y escriben ya un lenguaje español, por ejemplo, ya colonizado, ya pensando en que van a ser traducidos, ¿no?
So there are writers who write directly for translation in a language that has already been colonized, already thinking that they're going to be translated. So we can talk a little bit about language for translation, the creation of language.
No quiero ser polémica ideológicamente, no quiero que después me salten a la yugular, pero ideológicamente yo me siento contraria a eso. O sea, me parece que la ética del escritor, los escritores que me gustan a mí, tienen que no resignar nada a la traducción. Nada puede ser pensado para que después pueda ser más fácil de traducir.
So ideologically, I'm against that, and running the risk of being controversial. Ideologically, I think that writers shouldn't write like that. You shouldn't write thinking that you're going to be translated. It's just purely in the language that you want to write.
Yo escribo con esas, no sé cómo se dice, los que marcan el ritmo de los, ¿viste? Del piano, tac, 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 se nota que hubiera querido ser pianista, y por momentos el texto me pide faster, 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 ¿no? Como faster, como acelerarlo, y por momentos el texto me pide slowly, y esos pedidos de rapidez y de lentitud del texto me los pide la música, y yo obedezco a eso, ¿no? O soy sumisa a la música, a ninguna otra cosa, ¿no?
So I write as if I was writing, following a metronome, the rhythm of a metronome, as if I had wanted to be a pianist. But then the text asks me either to go faster, faster, or more slowly, to slow down. And so I need to sort of allow the text to take me where it wants to go. So I need to follow the rhythm that the text is asking of me, as in a musical piece.
Pero después cada traductora, cada editorial y cada lengua tiene sus posibilidades, y hay lenguas que han intentado edulcorar, por ejemplo, Matate Amor, hay otras que han intentado subordinarla y hacerla un poco más romántica, y eso, cada libro tiene después en su traducción una ideología distinta, ¿no?
So each book has its own ideology in the language into which it's been translated according to the rhythms of that language. So some translations have made Die My Love, for example, sweeter. So it depends on the rhythms of the language into which the book's been translated.
Y cuando fui a Berlín, desde el cliché dije, bueno, estoy en Berlín, estoy con la lengua alemana, voy a escuchar Die My Love, Steve Doch Liebling, voy a escucharla como con ladridos, ¿no? La voz, voy a escuchar una voz violenta, también obviamente de Hegel, pero del nazismo, y sin embargo sonaba dulce, y yo nunca me imaginé que en alemán iba a sonar dulce, ¿no?
So when I went to Berlin, and this talking from total cliche, I was expecting that the German version of the novel was going to sound like barks. So I'm thinking of Hegel, I'm thinking of Nazism, and suddenly I realized that I'm listening to my novel in a very sweet cadence. So I was completely surprised.
And is that a pleasant surprise, or is there a sense that to translate the work at all is to give up something, to give up control, number one, that we've talked about, but also to give up something of the work itself that feels violent or I don't know, unnecessary? Is there at all a point where you feel like you want to protect the work from this kind of exposure in other languages, or a sort of disintegration or a loss? Or do you feel like what you gain from being translated balances it out?
Sorprendida bien o sorprendida mal. ¿Te parece como que entregas algo de la obra misma a ese avatar que acabas de escribir, o es algo que estás dispuesta a entregar?
Sí.
Que pase eso que escribiste.
Claro, yo siempre torturo a las traductoras y trato de tener una relación cercana con ellas. Como ya he contado en el libro, hay algunas traductoras, muy pocas, la verdad que una o dos, que no me han querido conocer, y lo he sentido como un desplante amoroso, como una mala cita amorosa, pero siempre trato de pasarles música, ¿no? De que escuchemos música juntas, y a veces eso provoca que traduzcan de un modo que no iban a traducir si yo no les tenía ahí como molestándolas, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, te dejo traducir.
So I like to torture my translators, and I like to be very close to them and establish a relationship with them. And often some translators haven't wanted to meet me in person, and I felt disappointed as a lover, not wanting to meet me. But I feel that, yeah, I want to be there to make sure that doesn't happen. We listen to the same music.
Pero mi mayor problema fue con el francés, porque obviamente es la lengua que mejor hablo, y más que el hebreo, y el inglés por supuesto que lo entiendo más que el turco, pero no lo hablo perfecto en absoluto. Y con el francés hubo un problema político y casi nos matamos, ¿no? Casi llegamos al asesinato con la traductora.
So my biggest problem was with French, which is the language that I speak best. After Hebrew and English that I can understand, and completely differently from Turkish, which I don't understand at all. But I had a political problem with the translator that nearly ended in murder.
Sí, porque obviamente es un asunto político, ¿no? Y entonces los textos tienen palabras como deportación, hay palabras, no sé, retrasada mental, hay palabras que no son políticamente correctas o que tienen lecturas. Bueno, hoy en día, por ejemplo, eso, lo que más temo yo es la censura, ¿no? La autocensura. No es el caso de Annie y Carolina, pero muchas traductoras se censuran, ¿no? Al traducir.
So I'm particularly worried about censorship, and particularly about self-censorship, because there are very strong words in my texts that are not politically correct, such as retard and deportation, so I'm very worried that they might end up being censored, or that we might end up censoring ourselves.
Ariana, in another interview I read, you said that the writer shouldn't write a book unless they are willing to feel shame about what they're writing, that the writing has to come from a place of transgressing one's own morality. I think you used that word, which I found fascinating, and am 100% in agreement with that theory. But what does that mean for you, again, in terms of the translation, of worrying about something of the translator's shame? And maybe Annie, you can talk about this too, of what it feels like to say some of the words that are in this book about not wanting to be a mother, and taking an idea like that, but in Die My Love, I mean, that's translated in some very strong terms. Or the sort of in Tender, there's a lot about outsiders, about foreigners, a sort of disgust that the narrator has for everyone on the outside. So I'm very interested in this idea of the writer not censoring herself because she's worried that people will assume that the thoughts of the book, of the text, are her thoughts, and allowing herself to feel the shame of, oh my gosh, what am I saying? And then Annie, if you have anything to say about that, of what it's like to be in the position to translate it in as strong a terms as the original.
Me or Annie?
Both. Annie, maybe we can hear a little bit.
You first, or I don't mind.
Ariana, la idea es, partiendo de la idea que solamente se puede escribir una vez que estás dispuesta a escribir desde la vergüenza y a transgredir tu propia moralidad, etc.
Sí, lo entendí. Maryse, acabas de preguntar la mejor pregunta del mundo, porque es el centro de toda la escritura para mí eso.
So you've just asked the best question in the world, because the center of writing, at the core of writing for me.
No, lo digo muy en serio, más allá de las payasadas, que no sé cómo se traduce payasadas, porque lo primero que descubrí cuando empecé a escribir de verdad es el tema de la vergüenza y el pudor.
So the first thing that I discovered when I started writing, seriously writing, was the idea of shame and shame. Can't come up with a word.
Shame and shame.
Shame and shame.
No, porque exacto. Estaba frente a mi editora de anagrama y le dije, la próxima novela voy a escribirla desde la venganza de algo muy terrible que estoy viviendo, y ella me dijo, no desde la venganza, desde la vergüenza que estás sintiendo, y me di cuenta que ese ángulo es mucho más literario, no tanto la venganza que lleva a algo ideológico, sino la vergüenza.
So I was talking to my publisher from Anagrama, and I said, I'm going to write from revenge. I'm going to take revenge as my starting point for my next novel, revenge that I'm feeling about something that I'm going through at the moment. And she said to me, no, don't write from revenge, write from shame, because shame is a much more literary angle and a much more literary starting point.
Absolutamente, y eso por supuesto se aplica a todos los artistas, grandes escritores que admiramos. No creo que cuando Sylvia Plath escribe su drama íntimo, o Mindfield, o Catherine Mindfield, o Virginia Woolf, sus trastornos, no lo están escribiendo desde otro lugar, sino desde la vergüenza, ¿no?
I don't think Sylvia Plath or Virginia Woolf or Catherine Mansfield are writing from anywhere other than shame.
Y a mí, contrariamente, hay una frase, no sé si ustedes la usan en Estados Unidos o en Inglaterra u otro, pero en Argentina siempre para descalificar a las víctimas se dice, te da placer ponerte en el lugar de víctima.
So there's something we say in Argentina, I don't know if you use this kind of language in America or in the UK, but we talk very much about when you're a victim, you find pleasure in putting yourself in the place of a victim. That's a very Argentine thing.
Y nada es más mentiroso que eso. Estar en una posición de víctima es algo que da mucha vergüenza y mucho asco, no hay nada de placer. Y cuando escribo la próxima novela lo voy a hacer desde ahí, desde ese lugar.
There's nothing further from the truth. When you're a victim, you feel shame. It's a sense of disgust. There's nothing pleasurable about being a victim. No sé qué, ¿me repetís lo último, Ariana, que dijiste?
No importa, que no hay placer, pero ese lugar de vergüenza que decía Maryse, es un lugar muy, muy interesante para explorar literariamente, que es todo lo contrario a lo ideológico. Ahí me garantizo que todos los personajes tengan razón.
So in that place guarantees that every character is going to be in the right, is going to be right, because it's the opposite of ideology, shame.
And Annie, did you have something to add about this? What is the role of shame in your translation of Ariana's work, if there is any?
I think it's a super interesting question, and I think it's a question that's really like central to just how translators are thinking about translation at the moment generally. I think and my thinking has changed on this, I realize, during the time since translating Feeble-Minded and up to translating Tender, because I think during the process of translating Feeble-Minded, which has all kinds of politically incorrect words in it, I remember leaving a lot of comments in track changes saying like, Carolina, I don't think we can really say this, and her being like, yes, we can, I'm the publisher. But I was definitely kind of a voice saying like, I'm not sure if this is really okay. Whereas in the years since then, I've much more come around to the thinking that it's not the translator's role to censor the author, and it's also not the translator's role to take moral responsibility for the author. And I think those two things can go together, and you need both in your head simultaneously to be able to use a lot of the words that Ariana is using. But I think it fits interestingly with a lot of the talk at the moment about the visibility of the translator, because sort of if you're supposed to be standing side by side with the author and saying, this is my book too, that's not always something you feel quite comfortable doing. That's not always what you want to do. You can say, no, like these are my words and this is something I've written and I stand behind it as a translation. But I think sometimes you don't necessarily need to sort of, your relationship to it isn't the relationship that the author has to it, and it doesn't need to be in order for you to be the person who's written it in a different language. And yeah, I'm starting to think that since it does feel a bit sometimes like censorship from what some things that a translator can feel like they have to do in order to sort of make the language a bit more acceptable. You don't want the translation to be much less acceptable in English. You don't want it to sound, you want the effect to be the same. So you don't want to leave in words that would then suddenly seem a lot more shocking in English, but you also don't want the effect to be less shocking. Mm-hmm. But then also, from a practical point of view, it is really helpful if your co-translator is the publisher of the book, so you can just definitely check these things are okay during the translation process. But yeah, it's interesting.
Sí, sí, a mí siempre me encanta lo que dice Annie, lo que entendí, pero siempre me da la sensación de que la diferencia entre el autor y el traductor, la autora y la traductora, es que el que comete el crimen, y perdón otra vez la referencia a la violencia, el que comete el crimen es el autor. Yo escribí Feeble Minded, pero el traductor me acompaña a arrastrar el cadáver.
Apologies. So what's interesting about the relationship between the writer and the translator is that it's me who wrote Feeble Minded, and so I'm responsible for the crime, but the translator is the one who helps me drag the body along.
Lo siento así, o sea, Annie, Carolina, Sarah Moses y todas las traductoras al serbio, al ucraniano o al portugués, las siento como que vamos arrastrando los pies y la sangre queda, y hay un acto de responsabilidad en traducir, ¿no?
That's how I feel. That's the case with Carolina, with Annie, with Sarah Moses, and all the other translators from all the other languages, Ukrainian, Serb, that they're helping me drag the body along, and there's blood, there's a trail of blood left, and we're pulling from the feet, and so the translator shares responsibility in this mess.
Y lo que quería decir era que yo muchas veces cuando admiro mucho a un autor, trato de conocer a su traductor. Por ejemplo, en el caso de Kertész, el autor húngaro ganador del Nobel, ¿no?
So when I really admire a writer, I want to know who their translator is. So it's the case of Kertész, the Nobel Prize winning author. I want to know who their translator is.
Entonces me tomo a veces un tren o un avión hacia otra ciudad, como lo he hecho varias veces, para conocer, si me dejan, ¿no?, a ese traductor, y es como si estuviera con el autor muerto. Los traductores son un poco los fantasmas de los autores, ¿no?
So translators are a little bit the ghosts of the author. So I will on occasion take an airplane or a train to go and meet a translator of a dead author particularly.
Y lo que quería decir era que este traductor, Adam Kovačić, gran traductor de toda la gran literatura húngara, contaba que cuando traduce a Kafka, lo que ve en Kafka es la relación de Kafka con el alemán, es una relación de extranjería, ¿no?
So when Adam Kovačić, who is Kafka's translator, a Hungarian translator of Kafka, what he finds in Kafka is Kafka's relationship with foreignness, a sense of foreignness.
Bueno, traduce del húngaro y del alemán, ¿no? Y me pareció interesante eso que observaba de Kafka, es decir, que la extrañeza de Kafka en alemán es porque Kafka tiene una relación de extranjería con esa lengua. Y eso un poco lo siento en mi escritura también. Yo escribo en español, pero con una relación de extranjería con el español.
So I have a relationship of foreignness with Spanish that I feel that Kafka had with German, this sense of foreignness, of strangeness, of separation from the language. It's the same for me with Spanish, because I write from a place of foreignness.
Claro, y esa relación de extranjería no tiene que ver con que use una palabra en desuso, anacrónica, que también, ¿no?, el humor anacrónico, palabras de hace 20 años, sino simplemente con una relación sentimental de extranjería con mi propia lengua. Y eso el traductor lo siente, lo ve, si es un gran traductor, ¿no? O sí.
So there's a sense of foreignness with my own language. It's not just in the use of anachronisms or words that haven't been used in about 20 years. It is that sense of foreignness with my own language, and that is something that the translator has to see. A good translator will feel that sense of foreignness from the language.
Yes, there's a certain, it takes away a certain smoothness, you know, that the reader's picking up on, that the language is sometimes difficult to read. And so you have to, like I was saying at the beginning, that you have to get the end to understand what comes before in a sentence or in a paragraph or throughout one of the novels. And that's what gives the language its texture, is that strangeness that's mirrored by the strangeness of being in these minds that populate each of the three books, that are so both very immediate in their intensity, but extremely distant. And it's that distance that I think is so amazing in the book, that it comes across with the intensity of feeling, but the sense of foreignness, of these people being like us, the feelings, especially for women, I personally, so familiar, and yet I don't quite know these protagonists. I don't know where they are. There's sort of this dislocation, the sense of being in a place that's familiar, but that you've never been before, that you don't quite recognize, and the people in the book often find themselves in that place too. So it's interesting to hear that, Ariana, that you have the same feeling, I guess, of distance with the language.
Sí, es una distancia del lenguaje, y que hace que los personajes se sientan como alguien que conoces, pero al mismo tiempo no los conoces, y que le quita esa suavidad o esa continuidad al texto. Y entonces el lector siente esa distancia que estabas describiendo, esa extrañeza.
Sí, no puedo leer lo que dice la gente, si es que hay gente, así que después me cuentan, pero yo estudié, mi recorrido académico empezó con el cine, ¿no? Y siempre observaba cómo creaba los personajes Ingmar Bergman, ¿no?
So I started my academic career with studying cinema, and so I was always intrigued and interested in how Ingmar Bergman created his characters. Something that I got from him.
Y en una película, por ejemplo, en Gritos y Susurros, vos ves que todos los personajes tienen algo animalesco en la cara, ¿no? Hay un comportamiento animal, es un lobo, un zorro, una ardilla, y también eso me pasa a la hora de crear los personajes, nacen siempre de los animales, ¿no?
I noticed that there was something animalistic in the facial expressions of the characters in Screams and Whispers. Sorry, I don't know this one. And so I always had this sense that there was always something animalistic about the character, so it was important for me to introduce animals to convey this.
Entonces, cuando creo un personaje no estoy pensando en una tipología nunca de hombre-mujer. Muchas veces durante 2 o 3 capítulos yo misma me siento un hombre, ¿no? Entonces, o una lechuza o un animal violento. Mis personajes tienen son un poco trans, ¿no? Son un poco travestis.
So my characters are a little bit trans. I can never think of a type. So I use animals in order to convey this the characters in this way. So there are many sections, for example, where I am a man, and so there's always a sense of imposture, I suppose, in that creation, and animals and this kind of animalistic sense that I got from Ingmar Bergman is useful in this way, isn't it?
Well, we're almost at the end of where we are at the end of our hour. I just want to add one more thing about the animals. If you could see from my perspective, my computer is covered by taped note cards of all the things that we had planned on discussing about the text, 90% of which we didn't get to, but one of the things was about animals, and animals are everywhere in these books. And I just wanted to point out one section that I find really interesting. On page 20 of Tender, the protagonist is following her son, but the way that the description of her finding him is at first of finding an animal. She says, and suddenly in the distance between the dark and the dark, there's a hunched up crow walking along. I get as close as I can so he can't fly away, but he carries on, no stopping until madness sets in. I tumble out running, try to fold him in my arms, but he pushes me aside. I stand in his path with a stricken shriek of son. So good, those 4 words. But he shoves me again and strides out in front. And what's so interesting, it happens so many times in the text, is that there's not a simile, right? It's not that the boy is like a crow, or someone is like an animal, or the woman is like a cow. It's that they are that thing. Just one of the like tiny things that I hope we discuss in detail, but just really beautiful, really brilliant, so that you get to the end of that paragraph. Of course, you know it's the sun, but there's that moment where you just see a crow, a really big crow walking. And I think that's just one little taste of the many brilliant turns of phrase in these books. So, gosh, yes, we're going to open up to questions now. I think we have some here. I just want to say one thing about the body of the text and the translators helping to drag the body. Thank you so much to Annie and to all the translators, and for editors like Carolina and publishers like Charco for bringing us these beautiful, amazing, inspiring bodies. So much of my writing life has been inspired by works in translation. My favorite authors are all people who don't write in English. And without all of you, I probably wouldn't be a writer. And I certainly wouldn't have the pleasures that I've had as a reader in my almost 40 years. So thank you. Thank you for these bodies. All right. Let's get to the questions. Sam from the UK. Hi, Sam. Ariana, Spanish as a language has such heat and hurry in it to our ear compared to English. Does English sound to your ear distant and objective and considered, with the heat turned down, as it were? I like that.
¿Te suena el inglés como una lengua distante con el calor, digamos, con la temperatura, digamos, disminuida en comparación al español?
Bueno, increíble pregunta. Me iría a Boston o a Chicago o a Manchester a seguir esta discusión años, porque digamos que yo estoy escribiendo en un español porteño en medio del frío del campo francés. Entonces las temperaturas de las lenguas ya están alteradas.
So I'm writing in a porteño Spanish, is the Spanish of the city of Buenos Aires, but in the middle of a French rural winter. So the temperatures of the language are already altered as I'm writing.
Porque es muy importante decir y saber que yo compongo, porque hablamos siempre de composición, ya que hablamos tanto de música, escribir es componer, yo compongo pensando siempre en francés.
Because seeing as we're talking about writing as music, I would say that I compose thinking in French. I'm writing in Spanish, but I'm composing with French on my mind.
Y es muy conmovedor haber descubierto que la trilogía de Charco en inglés tiene un sonido que es muy auténtico, es un sonido para mí producido por la mezcla de francés y español.
So it's very moving to find out that the Charco trilogy has this sense of I can hear the French in the Spanish.
Es un nuevo sonido producido por esa mezcla de esos dos, pero es muy auténtico.
It's a very authentic sound that's been produced from the mixture of those two. but it's very authentic. It feels very authentic to me.
Y por momentos, por supuesto, es hasta mejor que el original, como pasa con las traducciones. A veces es peor y muchas veces es mejor que el original.
And at times, it's often it feels better than the original. It happens with translation sometimes that it feels better than the original at times.
Oh, what a great question and great answer. The next question from Gray Cantor. How did you just decide on the title Tender when the Spanish title seems quite different?
Yeah, this is a good question. We were talking about the title of this book a lot. We had a lot of different options, most of which I now can't remember, but it was sort of a classic translating Ariana process where we thought maybe the title will be precocious. Then we thought, is there enough sex in it? And the answer was no. And because precocious in English, even though it can have that kind of sexual connotation, you talk about a girl being precocious in different ways. Always a girl, I was thinking this, which is interesting because in this case it's a younger boy. But anyway, it's, even though it can have sexual connotations, it also sort of sounds a lot like you're just particularly good at maths for your age, or sort of particularly good at school, which is not what we're really going for. And for example, in Spanish, like premature ejaculation uses the word precoz, which we don't have precocious ejaculation. That sounds different entirely. So basically we were looking for a word that would sort of deal with that, which would kind of include the like ideas of sort of young sexualized bodies. And then tender was a great kind of felicitous choice, I think, because there's so much meat in this book. Like the part where they go hunting suddenly begins to work really well with tender as a title. And I enjoy the way it sort of, I think, throws into relief a lot of the kind of butchery and raw meat in the book, which is something that can happen with translation that's nice. You can sort of shine the light from a different angle on a text by a different word that you choose, and then see it all in a slightly different tone shade.
Sí, tiene razón, porque siempre pongo Ariana Harwicz precoz y salen todas las disfuncionalidades de la eyaculación precoz, ¿no? Eyaculación precoz, Ariana Harwicz.
So it's very funny if I do a search and I put Ariana Harwicz precoz, then images of or links to premature ejaculation come up. Ariana Harwicz, premature ejaculation.
It's fitting.
El Feeble Minded y Die My Love también recuerdo largas discusiones por el título. ¿Te acordás, Annie? Es apasionante.
Long discussions around the titles of Feeble Minded and Die My Love as well. Fascinating discussions with Annie and Carolina.
What is Die My Love in the Spanish?
Mátate amor.
Es muy interesante porque, bueno, no tenemos tiempo, ¿no? Feeble Minded también la pensamos muchísimo porque es una palabra compuesta y la débil mental son 3 palabras. Die My Love es un poquito más poético y menos violento que matate. Die. Matate no es lo mismo que die. ¿No?
Yeah, Die My Love is less violent than matate. Matate is kill yourself. There's an emphasis there's a double emphasis, isn't there, to matate.
Pero kill yourself son muchas palabras, ¿no? Y la fuerza era que estuviera contenida como una piña en una sola palabra, matate.
So too many words. So the idea was that there would be a punch, a meaning contained in one punch. So matate was that one word that contained that punch of meaning.
It's still pretty punchy in the English.
Se siente como una piña en inglés también.
Sí, y quería decir que mis novelas, sobre todo Die My Love, tratan mucho sobre la comedia y el terror de un matrimonio, ¿no? Me gusta mucho Mindfield por eso también, la comedia que supone y el terror de un matrimonio. Y como yo como todos crecí viendo las películas americanas, ya hay un poco de inglés en esa comedia del matrimonio en mis novelas.
My novels contain the comedy and the horror of marriage, and so there was something very American about that all my 3 novels contain the comedy and the horror of marriage.
So our last question from Peter Steves. My brother-in-law is a brilliant philosopher. Peter, I'm gonna paraphrase your question just because of for the work of the translator to go back and forth. I think I understand what Peter is asking. So I had said that there might be a worry that a translation of your book or any book is a different book. And what Peter is asking is, isn't it the same worry for a book in the original that every time it's read, it's a different book, right? It's a different book for all of us. Our interpretation, our reading, the voice in our head. So he's asking, is there really a difference between this kind of literal translation and the translation that happens from your brain to the page and from the page to the reader, regardless of the originality of the language or not?
Sí, la pregunta tiene que ver con la lectura como una instancia de traducción. Es decir, si cada vez que un lector lee tus novelas existe una instancia de traducción, ¿qué diferencia hay entre la traducción literaria, digamos, y esta instancia de traducción? Si pensás que es lo mismo, o si te da miedo lo mismo.
Sí, bueno, leer es traducir, escribir es traducir, y creo que mis libros traducidos es una experiencia de traducción doble, así es como yo lo siento, y cuando leo mis libros traducidos siento como una especie de doble capa de traducción, ¿no?
So when I read my books in translation, I feel that there's a double translation. So if reading is an instance of translation and writing is itself an act of translation, every time I read one of my books in translation, I see a double layer of translation, yes.
Yo sé que hablo muy románticamente, me han acusado de ser romántica y no muy fáctica, pero insisto con la extranjería. Mis libros son libros about extranjería, entonces si la traducción puede sentir esa extranjería en mi lengua, se va a sentir en alemán, en húngaro o en inglés.
So I've been termed a romantic, and I hope I don't sound too much as a romantic, but I'm not very factual, but I would insist on that idea of foreignness. So if that sense of foreignness comes across in Hungarian, in English, or in any language, that's what it is about, that sense of foreignness being felt.
Por eso es muy importante que el rol político de la traducción, este es el siglo de la traducción. Muchísimos ejemplos hay de traductores, traductoras que censuran lo que están escribiendo para que no se provoquen escándalos, por ejemplo, en Estados Unidos o donde sea, de racismo o de misoginia. Y el traductor para mí es clave para que no se empiecen a leer mal los libros y a traducirlos mal, ¿no? Por miedo a una represalia, ¿no?
So the translator's role is crucial in making sure that books are not read incorrectly in a bit to try to avoid politically uncomfortable terms of misogyny and racism, etc. So it's important. It's a political question as well.
It's a good segue into the last question from Julia, and I'm going to paraphrase this one as well, Julia. I hope I capture the essence of your question. But Julie had read Die My Love with her, a book club, and it seems like the term postpartum depression kept coming up in reference to the circumstances of the character's emotions and her feelings about her child and her family. And there was a psychologist in the group that said that as readers, we always have to diagnose characters as if without the name of the pathology, these actions wouldn't be possible. And when I was rereading Die My Love yesterday in preparation for this, I had the same thought of of how the trilogy lacks any kind of psychological explanation. So the author's never trying to say, here's why the people act the way that they do, which is, to me, the goal of literature, to my taste, and the only way to get an accurate picture of a person is to avoid these types of labels and these distinctions, which end up obscuring the true individuality of a person's experience. So can you respond to that about the choice not to put these terms in, and then the worry that the reader might, in their anxiety to explain the characters?
La pregunta tiene que ver con el hecho de que en las novelas no aparecen diagnósticos de los personajes. Por ejemplo, la persona que pregunta cuenta que en su club de lectura hay una psicóloga que decía que constantemente estamos diagnosticando a los personajes, pero en las novelas no aparece el diagnóstico, no dice depresión postparto, entonces querías algo acerca de esta ausencia de diagnósticos dentro de la novela que deja que el lector se relacione con los personajes a partir de esos diagnósticos, pero no, digamos que no está en la novela.
Sí, excelente pregunta, que también nos llevaría a un seminario, que es que me parece que eso sería la anti-escritura. Es decir, que me parece que la escritura identitaria, en mi forma de concebir la literatura, es la anti-escritura. No escribo a partir de identidades fijas.
So that would be the anti-writing. So I don't write from fixed identities. So identity writing is it would be the opposite. So I don't write from fixed identities.
Sí, la antiescritura, ¿no? Porque es decir que la escritura es todo lo contrario a una definición de tipo patológico, ya sea... Yo nunca diría que feeble-minded es una relación de madre-hija simbiótica. Nunca diría eso, porque si digo que son simbióticas o incestuosas, mato el misterio, y si mato el misterio no hay novela.
If I say overtly that feeble-minded is a symbiotic relationship between mother and daughter, or if it's an incestuous relationship, I am breaking the mystery, ruining the mystery. And so that would go against writing, or it's anti-writing.
Y si digo que en tender o en precoz, la madre y el hijo son dos marginales, sí, otra vez, incestuosos, y ella es alcohólica, entonces no tiene ningún sentido. Quizás sirve para un centro de alcohólicos anónimos o una terapia, pero no sirve para la experiencia de la literatura.
So it doesn't help the experience of literature for me to term the mother in tender as an alcoholic or their relationship as incestuous, because that would be useful for a therapy center or for an AA meeting, but not for literature. That's not what literature is about.
Y eso, lo mismo con decir que mis novelas son feministas o son novelas que reivindican la independencia y la emancipación de la mujer. Escribir ya es emanciparse. Escribir lo es. O sea, cuando escribo ya estoy emancipándome, siendo rebelde. La escritura misma lo es.
So writing is itself an act of rebellion. So writing in itself is freeing oneself. So the same happens when my books are labeled feminist writing. It's the act of writing that where resistance and rebelliousness and freeing oneself lies.
I think that's a great place to end discussion. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thank you again, Pierce and Brookline Booksmith, for hosting this event. And please buy these books, buy them from Brookline. if it's within your budget. People don't get paid to do this work. It's work that is vital to readers and to writers. It supports all of us here, all writers everywhere, all translators, all bookstores. When you buy a book, it's for all of us. So thank you everyone.
Thank you everyone for joining us, the four of you, in just amazing. I could listen for hours. We were talking in the green room that this was not going to be enough. We went overtime. It's still not enough. Give me a 10-part course, a podcast. Thank you all. This has been so brilliant. Lots of lovely comments in the chat. We do have the trilogy in stores here on Tuesday, but we have copies early, so if you just can't wait, you can dip out to the store right now. I also put the link to Charco. They have a lovely bundle if you're in the UK. Thank you everyone so much for joining us today. This has been incredible.
Quiero agradecer muchísimo, realmente estuve en manos de ustedes tres, estoy en manos de las traductoras siempre, un autor siempre está en manos de sus traductores, pero hoy estuve también en manos de Mariana y bueno, de Maryse y Pierce. Muchísimas gracias, es una gran felicidad de verdad.
Thank you very much. I'm very grateful to have been in your hands. I'm always in the hands of translators, but it's been a pleasure to be in your hands today. Thank you, Ariana. Gracias.
Thank you, everyone. And goodbye.
Bye, thank you.